Is this the most difficult word to translate in Spanish? Poder. I mean, when you look in most dictionaries, it's translated as to be able to do something. Sometimes I joke with my students and say that it can be translated as to can. But sometimes, if you're trying to understand it as a student or you're trying to explain it to other students, what I found is that sometimes the best route is the etymological route. What I mean by this is that in English, there is a word that's almost identical to poder, which means a very similar thing and can actually restructure in a constructive way the way we think about this verb in Spanish. Look at the word poder and change that D with a W. And suddenly you see a word that's very familiar. Now, you may have caught onto this already, but if you hadn't, don't blame yourself because it's a pretty weird consonant change. I mean, how on earth could D and W be related? And in this episode, I want to look at the peculiar history of poder in English and Spanish. Or rather, I'd like to look at the peculiar history of how the Latin potere became poder in Spanish and power in English. The Spanish transition is fairly intuitive. I mean, from D to T, they're pretty similar sounds. I'll leave maybe a more accurate description below. In English, the answer lies in the Norman conquest. As many of us know, what we today call England was conquered by the Norman French in around 1066. 1066 is usually the set date that we give to this. And of course, from then on, English became the official language of court in England, and consequently, a lot of English vocabulary today actually comes from French. But of course, an important distinction is that the French that was spoken and was spread throughout England was Norman French. That is to say, French from the modern-day region of Brittany or Normandy in France. And that's a French that's influenced by Old Norse because that's what the Normans actually spoke before they settled the region. So as a consequence, there are certain dialectical differences between French as spoken in Paris and French as was spoken in Normandy. And one of those dialectical differences may have been how the Latin potere had been translated and passed on. You see, in Parisian French, it was something like already pouvoir, as far as my research tells me, whereas in Norman French, it was often pronounced more like pouvoir. That is to say, P-O-E-I-R often. Now, it's not difficult to see how that would be transliterated with a W, and not the V sound that we see in modern-day French pouvoir. And that was the form of potere that was brought into English. Now, the interesting thing, of course, in English is that we keep it only as a noun. We only talk about the power of something. We only talk about so-and-so's power. In Spanish, of course, it's both a noun and a verb. But if we start thinking about poder as power, it kind of helps clarify things a little. When we start thinking of poder in terms of potency, capacity to do something, power, latent but as yet unfulfilled potential, then I think it helps us wrap our minds around this really strange verb, poder. Let me know below. Maybe if you teach Spanish, try it out with your students. Or if you're learning Spanish, see if this conceptually helps you wrap your head around this very difficult to understand and use verb in the Spanish language. Tell me what you think in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Hasta la próxima.